It happened a few years ago, but I still think about it often. No matter how much I try to push it out of my mind, it creeps back in, especially at night when everything is quiet. This is the story of a night that still haunts me, a night I can't explain, no matter how hard I try. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip with a few friends to a cabin deep in the woods. We wanted to get away from the city, relax, and enjoy some peace and quiet. The cabin wasn't anything fancy, just an old place my friend's family owned, but it was perfect for what we needed. No cell service, no internet, just nature and us. We arrived late on a Friday evening, just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. It was beautiful but isolated. There wasn't another house for miles, and the nearest town was about a 40-minute drive. We unpacked, got settled in, and decided to light a fire outside. We sat around it for hours, laughing and telling stories, enjoying the kind of freedom you only feel when you're far from everything. At some point, around midnight, we all started to get tired. The fire was dying down, and the cool air was setting in. One by one, my friends started heading inside to crash for the night. But I stayed outside a little longer to finish my drink and enjoy the peace. That's when I noticed it. It started as a faint sound, barely noticeable at first. I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't the wind. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, crunching the dry leaves just beyond the circle of light from the fire. My heart skipped a beat and I strained my eyes to see, but there was nothing out there. Just darkness. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a fox, but something about the sound was off. It was too steady, too human. I stood up scanning the trees, but still I couldn't see anything. The footsteps stopped. For a few moments there was only silence. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. I grabbed my flashlight from the porch and shined it into the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. But the beam didn't reveal anything. Just trees, endless trees. I was about to turn back and go inside when I heard it again. This time it was closer. The footsteps were unmistakable now, heavy and deliberate, like someone, or something, was walking straight toward me. My heart was racing, and I felt the panic rising in my chest. I backed up toward the cabin, keeping the light pointed into the woods, but still there was nothing. No figure, no movement, just those terrifying footsteps getting closer and closer. I bolted inside, slamming the door behind me. My friends were all asleep, unaware of the growing terror outside. I locked the door and checked the windows, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for the right moment. The rest of the night was quiet. No more footsteps, no more strange sounds. But I didn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What had I heard? Was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? Or was there really something or someone out there? The next morning, I told my friends what had happened, but they brushed it off, saying it was probably just an animal. Maybe they were right, but I knew what I heard. I knew those footsteps weren't the random scurrying of an animal. They were deliberate, purposeful. We left the cabin the next day and I've never gone back. But every now and then, late at night, when the world is still and quiet, I think about that night, and I wonder if whatever was out there that night is still out there waiting, watching. I often wonder what would have happened if I had stayed outside just a little bit longer. Would I have seen what was lurking in the shadows? Would I have come face to face with the source of those footsteps? I guess I'll never know. But one thing's for sure. I'll never forget that night, and the eerie feeling that something was watching me, just beyond the edge of the firelight. I remember the night clearly, even though it's been years. It's the kind of memory that creeps up on you in the quiet moments, when you're alone and your mind starts to wander. You ever have one of those moments where you hear a story that sticks with you? One you wish you hadn't heard because somehow it feels too real, like it could happen to you? This is that story. I wish I had never heard it, but now that I have, it's yours to carry too. It started when I was at a small get-together with a few close friends. It wasn't a party or anything, just a few of us hanging out in an old house that belonged to a friend's uncle. The house itself was eerie, with creaky floors, dim lighting, and furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But that wasn't what set the tone for the night. It was the story one of the guys shared. The conversation had turned toward ghost stories, and you could tell most of the stuff people were saying was made up on the spot or exaggerated for effect. We were all having a good time laughing, scaring each other, until one guy, Eric, spoke up. He was quiet for a while, listening, but when he finally decided to share, everyone went silent. His tone wasn't joking anymore, it was serious, almost like he didn't want to tell the story but felt like he had to. "I haven't told many people this," Eric began, his voice low, "because most people don't believe me. And honestly, I'm not sure if I believe it myself sometimes, but it happened." We all leaned in a little closer. "This was a few years ago," he continued, "when I was about 15. I lived in a small town, one of those places where everyone knows everyone. There was this house at the end of my street, an old, run-down place that had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. The kind, broken windows, overgrown yard. The whole place just felt wrong. Anyway, one night, a group of us dared each other to go inside. We were just being dumb kids, thinking it'd be fun to freak each other out. So, we all agreed to meet there after dark, break in and stay for a bit, just to say we did it." Eric paused for a moment, glancing at us before continuing. "There were 5 of us, and we managed to get in through a broken window. The house was exactly what you'd expect. Dusty, cold, and pitch black inside. We had flashlights, but they barely cut through the darkness. The air was thick. It hadn't been disturbed in years. We all kind of split up, exploring different rooms, trying to outscare each other." He shifted in his seat, his expression growing more serious. "Then we found the basement. I could feel the tension in the room rise. Everyone was hanging on his every word. We weren't going to go down there at first, but I don't know, something about it just drew us in. The stairs were rickety, and the whole place smelled like damp earth. We went down one by one, and when we reached the bottom, we realized it was bigger than we thought, way bigger than a normal basement. There were these old shelves with jars on them, some broken, some still sealed with weird, murky liquid inside." Eric's voice dropped to almost a whisper. That's when we heard it. "Hear what?" one of us asked, breaking the silence. At first, it sounded like footsteps, faint, coming from deeper inside the basement. We thought it was just one of the others messing with us, but when we called out, no one answered. The footsteps got closer, but we couldn't see anyone. A chill ran down my spine as Eric spoke. We started backing up, but then we heard something else. A voice. It was quiet, almost like a whisper, but it didn't sound right. It didn't sound like any of us. It was speaking in a language we didn't understand, but it had this weird, distorted tone. I can't explain it. It didn't sound human. One of my friends leaned forward. "What did you do?" Eric looked around the room, his eyes wide. "We ran. We bolted up those stairs and didn't stop running until we were out of the house and halfway down the street. But as we were leaving, I swear, I heard that voice again, only this time it was louder, and it said my name." The room went dead silent. No one spoke for a long minute. Finally, someone broke the tension with a nervous laugh, but it didn't change the feeling in the room. We could all tell that Eric wasn't making it up, at least he believed what he was saying. "So what happened after that?" another friend asked, trying to sound casual. Eric shrugged. "I don't know. None of us ever talked about it again. But sometimes late at night I still hear that voice, and every time it sounds a little closer." We all sat there, unnerved, unsure how to react. It didn't feel like a normal ghost story. It felt real. And for the rest of the night, none of us could shake the feeling that we weren't alone in that old house. That night started like any other. I had recently moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, away from the noise of the city, seeking a little peace. The place was nothing special, just a one-bedroom with an old-fashioned vibe, probably built in the 80s, judging by the creaky floors and outdated wallpaper. The rent was cheap, and the isolation was perfect for focusing on my work. But that evening, everything felt wrong. The air was cold, almost icy, and the stillness outside my window was unsettling. The trees barely moved in the breeze, casting long, dark shadows against the building's exterior. As I settled in on my worn couch, scrolling through my phone, I noticed it. A faint tapping sound. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, like something lightly scratching or knocking on the wall. I tried to brush it off as the house settling or maybe a branch brushing up against the building, but something in me was already uneasy. It was steady, repetitive, I got up, moving toward the sound. It seemed to come from one of the walls in the living room, right next to the window. I pulled back the curtain and looked out, expecting to see a loose branch or maybe a bird, but there was nothing. Just the empty stretch of trees in the dim night light, their branches bare and clawing against the sky. The tapping had stopped. So I sat back down, telling myself I'd imagined it, but it started again, louder this time. The sound was more insistent, as if someone, or something, was trying to get my attention. I stood there, staring at the wall, as the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I checked every door and window in the apartment, making sure they were locked. Nothing was amiss, but the tapping continued, now coming from a different part of the wall. It was as if the sound was moving, drifting from one side of the room to the other, following me wherever I went. Unease turned into dread, as I realized the tapping wasn't just random. It was methodical, intentional, almost like Morse code. I leaned my ear closer to the wall, half expecting to hear a logical explanation for the noise, but as I pressed my ear against it, the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so thick it seemed to press down on me. I exhaled, trying to calm my nerves, but then I heard it, a whisper. It was so faint, barely audible, like someone was speaking from deep within the wall itself. I couldn't make out the words, just soft, raspy syllables. Goosebumps prickled across my skin as I pulled away, stumbling backward. I wanted to laugh, to brush it off as nothing, but something in that whisper felt wrong. It was like someone was calling me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just an old building making noise, but as I lay down that night, the tapping started again, more insistent than before. This time it was coming from under the bed. My pulse quickened as I listened, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and disbelief. The tapping grew louder, a rhythmic drumming that felt almost alive, like fingers drumming impatiently on a surface. I grabbed my phone, flicking on the flashlight, and shone it under the bed. Nothing. Just empty space and dust. But as I clicked off the light and settled back into bed, I felt a sudden chill, like someone had opened a window. I glanced around the room, but everything was closed. Then, out of nowhere, the whisper returned, louder this time, as if it was right next to my ear. It was saying my name. My heart raced as the whisper grew louder, the words becoming clearer. I couldn't make sense of them. Some of the words were familiar, others felt distorted, twisted into something else. I tried to cover my ears, but the voice grew even louder, relentless. It felt like it was inside my head, echoing and looping, calling out to me over and over. Then, everything went silent again. I hesitated, afraid to open my eyes, but something compelled me to look. I slowly opened them, and that's when I saw it. A message scratched into the paint on the wall, barely visible in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. It read, "I can see you." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The message was fresh, the letters jagged and rough, as if they'd been carved with a sharp object. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't heard anyone enter the apartment, and I knew I was alone. But somehow, someone, or something, had left me this message. I bolted from the room, grabbing my coat and keys, and fled into the night without looking back. I drove around for hours, too shaken to return. The sun was beginning to rise when I finally gathered the courage to go back. I brought a friend with me, needing someone to confirm what I'd seen, to tell me I wasn't going crazy. When we entered the apartment, it was silent, too silent. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves held a secret. I pointed to the spot on the wall where the message had been carved, but to my horror, it was gone. The paint was smooth and unmarked, no sign of the message that had been there just hours before. My friend looked at me like I was losing it, and honestly, I was starting to believe him. I moved out a few days later, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking just beyond my sight. I still don't know what happened that night, or how to explain it, but one thing is certain. I'll never forget those words carved into my wall. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that tapping, faint and far away, as if it's calling out to me from some dark place I never want to visit. If this story left you with a chill, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good scare. You never know what might be lurking in the dark.